So, Titus chapter 2 falls in the middle of the book. There's only 3 chapters, so right in the middle is Titus chapter 2. And to be honest, my first reading of the chapter seemed quite overwhelming. Just a lot of instruction in there on how to live right. And for me, I get a little bit overwhelmed with that. And so I took a little time to look at the context of this letter, which really helped a lot to understand sort of the instructions that Paul was giving to Titus in this letter. So some of the context is that Paul wrote this letter to Titus for a church on the island of Crete that had started looking or had become like the culture of the island. They were reflecting the culture that they were a part of. And part of that culture revolved around the god Zeus, who was into sexuality and into lying. And so a lot of the culture within the church started to look like the culture on the island. The culture in the church started to reflect the culture of the island. The women were giving themselves sexually to other men outside of their marriage. The men were lying and cheating themselves. And so the church looked no different than the culture in that island. And so with that context, it sort of helps me understand what Paul was trying to create with this letter. And really for me, it really was understood in the first verse of Titus chapter 1. So let me read that. He says, As for you, Titus, promote the kind of living that reflects wholesome teaching. And for me, I think that word reflects kind of helps us understand the reason for chapter 2. And he says, promote the kind of living that reflects wholesome teaching. In other words, you reflect the culture you listen to. Come on. You reflect the culture you listen to. You reflect the culture that you allow into your life. You reflect the culture that you hang around. You reflect the culture that you allow to influence your life the most. And this had become the church. The church had allowed themselves to reflect the culture on that island. Instead of the church influencing the culture started influencing the church. Come on. Instead of the light impacting the darkness started impacting the light. Not that darkness can ever overcome light, because it cannot. You know that, I know that. But sometimes it does feel a little dark in our life. Am I right? Sometimes it can feel like we don't know what we're doing. We don't have good direction. We don't have a good feel for what's next around the corner. And so sometimes our life can feel a bit dark, and it feels like the darkness is overcoming the light. But in all reality, light always overcomes darkness. But the church had allowed the culture of the island to influence their life, and they started reflecting that. I mean, the women were giving themselves sexually outside of marriage. The men were lying and cheating. And so when Paul wrote this letter to Titus, he essentially was saying, don't let the culture influence the church. He says, let your life reflect wholesome teaching. In other words, he said, reflect good teaching, reflect a good culture, reflect good, wholesome way of living. And then here, check this out. So then the rest of the verses is Paul setting up a good culture for them to reflect. He starts with elders. He's like, okay, here's some elders that need to kind of create the culture for the church. That's good. I need some good, healthy men to create a culture for a church. I need a good, healthy husband to create a culture for his family. I need some healthy men to create the culture for a city, for a nation, for a world. I need some men to step up and surrender and create a culture for a people. And then he talks about from there, we want to create culture with our women, right? We want our women to live in a certain kind of culture that's healthy and life-giving and encouraging and positive. Like, this is the godlike culture. He's like, I want the women to start creating a culture. And then he says, in the same way, I want young men to start creating a culture. So it starts with the older men, the elders, and then the women, and then the younger men. I want you to also create a culture within your family, your church, within your school, your business, your work. You create the culture of how we're supposed to live. And he talks about slaves as well. And so he says, when this healthy culture has been created, he said, reflect that, which to me makes the lifestyle that he instructs us to live a lot easier than trying to do it on my own. In other words, you need community. You need healthy community to reflect in order to bring out the lifestyle that God wants us to live, the culture that God invites us into. Come on. You need healthy community. You need healthy culture to reflect. That just makes it, for me, a little more doable. Because the people that you allow in your life, the culture that you allow around you, is ultimately the people that you reflect. Think about the culture that may be in your life right now. Does it reflect a godly, healthy lifestyle? Think about the culture you let in through social media. What does that look like? What kind of culture are they creating in your life individually? Think about the news or the workplace, and think about school, or like, what is the culture that you're allowing in to shape your life, where your life reflects the people that you're around? He said, because the people you allow in your life, or ultimately the culture that you allow in your life, is the culture that you will reflect. Not that we are supposed to separate ourselves from the rest of the world. Be in the world, but not of it, right? You can be around a certain culture, but just don't be of it. Like, don't allow the culture to impact you. Don't reflect the culture around you. You can be in it, not of it. But I think in order to live out that healthy lifestyle, we've got to create or build a healthy community with a healthy culture around our life. the social media, everything that we let into our life, from the music we listen to, podcasts we listen to, all of that creates a culture within you, which makes the lifestyle that Paul's inviting us into a little easier to reflect. Come on. So all of that, I think, is what he's getting at. But then one last thing, right in the middle, verse 11, he says, "For the grace of God has been revealed, bringing salvation to all people." In other words, don't get hung up on the pursuit and the effort to perfect your life, on the pursuit to reflect a right culture. Don't get hung up on that, because that ultimately, though as healthy as that is, that ultimately isn't what brings the salvation, the healthy living into your life. He says, you want to know what it is? It's God's grace. God's grace is what ultimately gives you healthy, God-living character. It's the grace. And grace is giving you the space to sometimes make mistakes, to sometimes make wrong decisions, because every mistake, every bad decision is an opportunity to grow, to teach you something. All that grace does is give you the space to grow even stronger in your walk with the Lord. So, allow the grace of God to bring the salvation that you need, and I need, and we all need, to live the lifestyle that He has created us to live. Find a healthy culture to reflect, and may God's grace bring you life.